Well, hello everyone. So we're here at Fearless Artworks for the Fearless Author Series, and we're here with Eldred. Eldred, because of the bird and the Eldred that screws me up. Eldred Bird, and he's talking about his Killing Karma and Catching Karma book. I'm going to turn the presentation over to him, and then we'll come back at the end of his reading and discussion for some Q&A. So thanks for tuning in, everybody.
Thanks, Michelle. I figure the best way to start this is to kind of let people know a little bit about the main character of this series, James McCarthy. This is kind of, the first book, Killing Karma, is kind of a late coming of age story. James is in his 30th year when his mother passes away, and it's just been him. So I think the best way to get a good, solid introduction to James is to just go ahead and read the first part of this chapter for you, so that of the first chapter, and it really lets you know where he's starting his journey. So
make sure you're using your outdoor voice.
Yeah, I'm trying. All right. Rose McCarthy, a simple, straightforward woman in life, had no wish to be otherwise in death. The coffin she arranged to carry her earthly shell to its final rest appeared tasteful but understated, the service short and to the point. It was only 10:30 in the morning, and the late September sun had already taken its toll. The small group gathered at the cemetery on the western edge of the desert metropolis, fidgeted, tugged at collars and ties, and fanned themselves with anything they could find. James stood in silence, his eyes fixed on his mother's casket, afraid to look away, like if he shifted his gaze for even a moment, it would become real. After what seemed like an eternity, he straightened his back, swallowed the lump in his throat, and turned away. The walk back to his car was only 40 yards, but for James it might as well have been 40 miles. His feet never broke contact with the ground as he trudged toward the parking lot, feeling as if his knees would give out at any time. A trembling hand produced the keys from his pocket and almost dropped them as he reached up to open the door. He slid behind the wheel and stared at the passenger seat for a long moment. The empty space grew in his memory. It grew as the memory of its former occupant echoed in his mind. Except for his mother, that space had never been filled by any other living being. No one filled it as he followed the ambulance carrying his mother to the hospital. No one filled it as he followed the hearse to the graveyard. Now it was filled only with memories. He found himself wishing there was someone else there, someone to fill the emptiness and break the silence on the long ride home. As he started the car and pulled out on the street, he left her behind for the first time, and for the first time in his 31 years, James McCarthy was totally alone. So that kind of gives you a basis for this character. He's someone that has been isolated with just his mother, has never had anything else. So it's kind of, James was a very sheltered person. His mother had very strict rules, and so he kind of never did anything wrong. And that's the concept of these things, of this book, is really, when you have no experience, how do you go out in the world alone like that? So I think this might be a good time to take a couple of questions, about this book, and then maybe I'll do a little reading from the second book. And if you guys are interested, just stick around. I might give you a peek at the third book that's still in progress at this point. So, questions?
Where did you get the idea for the book?
It's something that's kind of been brewing in my head for a long time. Where I actually worked the story out, really, was on a drive to Pennsylvania, of all places. We were going back east for a funeral of someone who was very close. And we decided not to fly. Because of the emotion of the situation, we decided we wanted the time to process, so we drove. And in driving, my wife Debbie and I, alone for 3 days on the road, we did a lot of talking. And I said, I have this character that I want to do something with. I have this idea. And as we discussed over the course of hours and hours on the road, the story grew, the character grew, and he became much more clear in my head. And by the time we made it back from Pennsylvania, James was fully alive in my brain. He was a complete person, not just an idea or a character, but I could see him, I could hear him, I knew his voice, I knew his face, and that's really where it came from, was that trip, and years of just wanting to do something like this and take that plunge. I had done a lot of personal essay stuff where I tell my own stories, but I'd never gone into the fiction side and told someone else's story, and so that was important to me to get that out. By the time I really knew this character, I really wanted his story to get out there, and so he started telling it to me, and that's really where it came from. So.
About how long did it take you to write the first book?
The first book was almost exactly a year. The funeral was in September, and as soon as we got back, I sat down at the computer and I started, and it just started coming out. And by about June, I had a really good idea. May, June, I had a really good chunk of it done. So I started going. At that point, I found a critique group, group of local writers, and I started going to them and started doing reading and getting feedback from them, and it shaped it even more from there. It actually evolved the story a little bit more, and evolved the character a little bit more as I was able to learn from other people and get other people's feedback on it. So by the time we got through with all the editing, all the putting together of the book, the ebook and the print book, and all the mechanics that go into that, it was a full year. The second book actually took a little bit longer, but it is a longer book too, and much more involved. There's significantly more characters in the second book. James kind of picks up a family in this first book, and that family continues to grow throughout the series. And so the books keep getting longer and more complicated, but they also, I think, are getting much better as well. Not that that there's anything wrong with the first book, but I think that it's growing. As the characters grow and I become more attached to them and they become more real to me, then I'm able to make them more real to the readers and stuff too. So.
Why did you use the word killing in your title?
Why did I use the word killing in the title? The whole idea of killing karma comes from the fact that James has never done anything wrong, because James has never done anything. He's a journalist, freelance journalist. He works from home. So he does all of his research on computer. He rarely goes out of the house for anything. His mother sheltered him completely. So the idea is if karma was money, James would be a very rich man. So when he is then left alone in the world, he decides he has to change. There are things that happen that really force him to make that decision to change, and so he decides, I've got all this idea of the good karma thing. It's time to start spending into that balance and start killing off some of that good karma. I'm going to use it up. So that's where the idea of killing karma comes from, is it's using up that good karma. But over the course of things, you kind of figure out that James has so much good that he can't do bad even when he tries to. So it's just not in him. So he is attempting to kill karma, but it just isn't working. So.
Where did the idea of the Bank of Karma come from?
Well, it's rooted in that idea of if karma were money, that he would be a very rich man. We've actually used the image of the Bank of Karma. I've created a debit card basically, and that image will be on all covers somewhere. It's in the second book you can see it gets a little bit smaller, but it's there. Haven't quite figured out where I'm going to hide it in the third book yet. But it's going to be kind of the trademark piece that ties the things together. But it's one of those things where, I mean, if you think about karma, no matter what you believe as far as what's out there entity, it's just the idea of a positive energy and a negative energy, and your balance on that card is entirely up to you. So you can be in a negative balance, you can be in a positive balance. So James, his bank of karma is probably well beyond most people's. Let's put it that way. So maybe let's take a peek at the second book. I do have a little bit that may show a little bit more of how he's spinning into that. One of the things that James does pick up in the first book is he kind of gets a family. He's unofficially adopted, and so one of the people is his brother ends up being a cop. So in the second book, in Catching Karma, they're actually he's helping his brother Will Dugan to find to basically chase down a killer, because it starts with a murder in the second book, and so it becomes a little more of a detective series into the second book. But still, really, it's the adventure. It's about the characters. The detective part really is kind of a vehicle to bring the characters out even more. So we'll do a little from the second one. The setup is that Will and James are out in the mountains. It's the first time James has ever camped, because he's never been anywhere. He's never done anything. So it was a new experience for him. Hey, Will, James pointed to the west. Someone's coming. Will jumped up and spun 180 degrees as his hand landed on the gun strapped on his belt. He relaxed his stance immediately when he saw the sun glint off the gold star pinned the man's chest. The officer's brown and tan uniform blended into the landscape. Had it not been for the movement of his steady gait, James might never have seen him until he was right on top of him. The stocky Native American man spoke in a slow monotone. Detective Dugan? And he extended his hand. Nestor Yazzie, Yavapai County Sheriff's Office. Call me Will. He shook his hand and pointed to James. This is Jimmy McCarthy. Nestor turned toward James and looked him over. You're not a cop. It was clearly a statement, not a question. No, James answered, I'm just family. You don't look like family. Nestor's tone and expression didn't change as he spoke. You married in? I was kind of adopted, James responded, unofficially. Stray dog, Nestor nodded. James looked surprised. I'm a stray dog? Nestor put a hand on James' shoulder. Don't worry, I like stray dogs. So that kind of gives you a picture of one of the new characters in the second book, and Nestor is an interesting character. He's a Navajo, but he works in Yavapai County. He's when we first meet him, he sounds very stereotyped, but as we go along and the layers start to come off, you start to figure out that Nestor's a whole lot deeper than people assume he is, and he's actually loosely based on a few people that I've known over the years. I went to school with quite a few Native Americans in the Verde Valley, Navajos, Hopis, Yavapai Apaches. And as well, my father worked with a couple of Navajo brothers out at Page and St. John's and such as that. And Ray, one of the guys that he got to know, Nestor's very much based on Ray. One of those guys that when you first meet him, very stone-faced, very dry, very monotone. But then you figure out that there's something under there, and when it starts to peek out, it gets interesting. So, so as you learn more about Nestor, you really learn more about some of those people that they're a lot deeper than they look. So, than they initially want you to think they are. So.
Are there any elements of truth in your books?
Yeah, actually, there are quite a few. Some of James's views on the world are my own. I've always been a very solitary person. My family will tell you I used to take off in the hills by myself all the time. Go for, take off, go for walks, go for drives, go whatever. And so some of that comes from, some of James comes from those experiences, but I wasn't isolated by circumstance. It was more of a by choice at that point. And a lot of what goes on with the characters and and such. It is based on things that are really out there, and especially the locations. The locations are very, very much true to life. I like to keep my stories in Arizona at this point. James has never been more than 30 miles from home in the first book, before the first book. He's never been outside of the city, really. Just that thing. So there's a lot of territory for James to explore, and Arizona has a lot to explore. And so with each book, we can get further and further and really start to show the things that this state has to offer. This is a very diverse state, and people do tend to think that we are just a big desert. They don't think about the fact that we have huge stands of ponderosa pine, the largest contiguous in the world, actually. That we have so many different climate zones, right up to permafrost on the top of the peaks. So I think the only thing we're really missing is rainforest, and there's one little canyon that comes close. So yeah, there's a lot to Arizona, and there's a lot of history here, and so I do want to pull those things in. I want to pull in some of the local flavor, which is one of the reasons why a lot of people create a fictitious town or a fictitious place to put their things. I'm putting them in the real places. Now, I do make some adjustments, especially in the second book, where I'm talking about places where someone could get hurt if they try to go exploring and try to find the locations and things like that. I purposely move locations for those things. Excuse me. But for the most part, I want to let people know what we have here and what we have available in the state, and that we are more than what people actually picture. So, sorry, gotta get a drink here. Still recovering from a cold. My voice hasn't completely come back yet, so. All right. Anybody else got something, or?
Where did your pen name come from?
Aha. Well, most people know me as Bob, not Eldred. Eldred is actually my middle name, and it's a family name. My father was Eldred, but he never went by that. He went by Jack because he was a junior, so my grandfather was also an Eldred. But when I started writing and started looking out there and thinking about putting a book out there and actually selling and getting my name out there, I noticed that there were a lot of birds, a lot of Robert birds. There were even a lot of Robert E. birds. And Bob is so common that, you search me and I'd be 40 pages down on Google. But when I searched on Eldred, it was, the only thing that came up was my father. So, when I searched on Eldred bird. So I thought, it's still my name. It still ties me in, needs to be tied in, and I can keep my last name. A lot of people use pen names because they want to hide. I don't necessarily want to hide. I use the pen name because it's easier to recognize, because if you search it, I'm first in line. I'm the first person you'll see, then you'll see a little about my father, but that's pretty much it. And then you start getting off into Eldreds with other last names, or Eldred, Pennsylvania, or Eldred, New York. Believe it or not, there are quite a few towns in the U.S. named Eldred for some reason. But mostly it's the uniqueness of it. It makes me much more searchable and much more stand out that way. So.
Do you have a favorite character and why?
That's hard. It's like picking your favorite child. Because all of these, well, yeah, one child, it's real easy. Now there's a whole host of characters that live in my head, and they do live in my head. It's not just that I write these things. If you really want to write good characters, you have to really know the character. And so they really are in my head as separate entities, and I talk to them and I make them talk to each other, and that's how I write dialogue, is I sit down and I listen to them talk. But so it's really hard to pick a favorite. I think James kind of is, because he's the first and he's the one that everything is pretty much centered around. But Nestor Yazzie is becoming a favorite for me because he is such a deep character. He does have a lot to offer, and he can take James and take the readers to a lot of different places. He's someone that has a much deeper story than even James does. James, his story is in discovering things that he's never experienced. Nestor has experienced these things, and his story is in taking James and the readers and other people into those experiences that he's had. So he's kind of fast becoming a favorite. But I really can't. I don't think I could really choose one. If I did, it would have to be James. I can tell you that most of the women who read my books, their favorite is Missy Franklin. She's James's girlfriend that he picks up. For some reason, they all love her. She's a very strong character. She doesn't take crap from anybody, and I think that's why they like her. Is she tends to be a little bit of a strong character. So,
who is your least favorite character?
least favorite. You know, of the regular characters, I don't really have a least favorite. You have characters that pass through the stories, and those are your antagonists and your bad guys, and even those have their qualities that you kind of like in them. But as far as the regular characters go, probably Will Dugan. He's kind of the troublemaker in the family. He's the black sheep of the family. He's not like anybody else. And he doesn't want to be like anybody else, and so he can be kind of a putz sometimes. So, and he's even that way when he talks to me when I'm writing the books. So, so he probably would be the one that you wouldn't want to hang out with. Yeah.
I know a couple of authors who've taken unpleasant people in their real lives, put them in books, and then punished them. Has there ever been a temptation to do that?
I have not done that, no. I can tell you that some of the people that I don't like are loosely based. You know, some of my less desirable characters are loosely based on people that I've run into over the years, but nobody that I've stuck around, and nobody that's stayed in my life. Because I don't tend to hang on to those kind of people. I tend to move on and go to something more positive, someone more positive, somebody who brings something else to my life that's interesting or positive. So no, I don't like to punish people that way. I'm not saying that I'm not leaving that open for the future, but you know,
Thanks for the chat.
at some point we may need an antagonist who has some really deep qualities that I'm very familiar with. so I may draw on some of those people at that point. Yes.
You've got some references to music in your books. Can you tell us how that came about and how you selected those?
Yeah, in the first book, there are quite a few Easter eggs kind of hidden in there. The family that adopts James is Irish, basically. In fact, Donnie, the older brother, was born in Ireland. Will is the first one who was born in this country. So I kind of pull in some of the things. I'm kind of a fan of Irish punk, yeah, I guess you can call it, or Irish rock music. And so I do make some references and hide some things in there from people like the Dropkick Murphys and Flogging Molly, and even there's Ralph McTell, who's a British folk singer. There's a little bit of reference to him in there as well. I just think it's fun. It's something fun for people when they're reading through to kind of go, wait a minute, I know that from somewhere, and it also, if you kind of let it out there a little bit that there are some of those, then it entertains people even a little bit more, because now they're really paying attention to the story now, because they know that they're looking for these things, so they aren't just blowing through. So I don't know. It's just a fun little thing for people out there, and music has always been a huge part of my life. So I've always drawn on music for a lot of things. It's been kind of the one thing that's been there consistently in my life So I do tend to bring musical references to the books in the books and such. So thinking maybe we should give you a little peek of where things may be going in the third book. Right now I'm actually in the process of writing the third book, tentatively titled Cold Karma, because this one is basically, it's a cold case. In this one, Nestor has become a very major character in this, and so James is going to be helping Nestor to solve the cold case. Nestor has pulled him into this because James is a very intelligent person. He's always done a lot of, I mean, his whole life has been research and write it and communicate that way. So he has a lot of knowledge. He doesn't have a lot of experience to go with it, though. So Nestor is kind of going to give him some of that experience to go with the knowledge, but at the same time tap into that knowledge to help him figure out a 14-year-old case. So figured I'd maybe give you guys a little bit of a peek and read the first part of chapter 1 for the third book. James McCarthy strolled through the courthouse square park, his hands in his pockets and the crisp October air filling his lungs. While Phoenix and the rest of the valley sweltered in the early afternoon heat, Prescott was different. The higher elevation and nearly unbroken canopy of trees covering the park made all the difference. Autumn arrived in the mountain community much earlier than at his home in the city. The walk from his car to the little Mexican restaurant off the square was just what James needed after spending the morning being grilled by Detective David Alexander, the senior crime scene investigator from the Yavapai County Sheriff's Office. Went over every detail of the statement James had given about the shooting a couple of months earlier. Why was he there? Where did he get the gun he was carrying? How did the police know where to show up to rescue him? James was sure Alexander was trying to trip him up, find a hole in his story, but he never stumbled. Every detail in his written statement was accurate right down to the punctuation. Detective Alexander was a perfectionist, but James was more so. It was his business. The freelance writer had built a reputation on accurate observation and concise delivery of information. To be more precise, he had built Josh McDaniel's reputation on it. To the handful of people in the know, Josh McDaniel was the name that James used when he wrote. But to James, he was more. Josh was the mask that he hid behind. Fearing his youth and inexperience would hurt his credibility, James created the persona early in his career. He built such a distinctive personality around the character that Josh now occupied a permanent space in James's brain. Not so much a second personality, but more of a separate entity. The two conversed whenever James faced a challenge. More often than not, they argued. When forced to make public appearances, James would bite the bullet and dress as his alter ego. Not at all happy with the task, he considered it a necessary evil. A visit to Dugan's public house was usually required to get in the proper frame of mind. A stiff drink at his family's bar usually relaxed James just enough to allow Josh to come out and play. But today was not about Josh. So that's just kind of a little peek into there, and kind of lets you know that in the first book, James has taken a pen name because he figures he has no credibility. He's young. He's actually in high school when he starts writing, and he figures if people know it's him, they won't believe anything that he's written because he has no credibility. He's never done anything. He's never gone anywhere. So he creates the persona of Josh McDaniel, who is what the person that he projects in his articles. He writes travel articles where he puts Josh in the picture. Josh tells the story. It's as if he's there. So he's built this entire personality around this, and Josh becomes very much another personality in his head, and helps him. He kind of starts out as the devil on one shoulder in the first book, and egging James on when he does have to make the change and go out into the world and such. But by the end of the second book, he's almost becoming the angel on the other shoulder, becoming James's conscience, because James has gained a lot more experience. He may overstep sometimes. think he has more experience than he really does. And so Josh becomes the voice of reason, which is one of the evolutions that take place. You know, James evolves, so does Josh, but they kind of almost switch positions. It's kind of an interesting. It's an interesting dynamic between the two of them, but it all happens inside James's head. So, so it's a little complicated.
Where does Jimmy Ray fit into that?
Oh, Jimmy Ray. Jimmy Ray is someone that James is forced to play in the first book. Will pulls him into a drug sting at the last minute because there's someone who might recognize Will is working undercover, but there's someone he's busted before there. So he needs someone to go in and play a character. And he forces James into it, basically. He kind of blackmails him into it. Will is one of those who will do anything to get the job done, and he forces James into it. So Jimmy Ray is this drug dealer who then, in the second book, James is forced to play him again. It creates a little bit of a complication too, because there are stories start getting told about the Jimmy Ray character, and he becomes kind of an urban legend, so to speak. And so it complicates things because Will's partner has become fixated on trying to catch this Jimmy Ray. He has no idea that it's James and that it's something that Will has created, basically, and pushed James into. So Will has to kind of keep his partner off the scent while keeping James, you know, in the background, and still utilize that character in order to solve some of these things, because that personality has to come out every once in a while to facilitate moving some investigation forward. And I don't want to give away too much, because I want you guys to read the second book, because that's really where Jimmy Ray comes to shine, and where James really comes to shine as Jimmy Ray, because it's a pivotal moment for James. He learns a lot about himself in those situations where he's forced completely out of his comfort zone, and again, it's Will doing it, so he's we're back to the least favorite character thing. Will's a bit complicated and willing to do whatever it takes to get the job done, even if it means twisting things a little bit. So I don't want to give away too much there. I want you guys to read it and really see what happens to him. So.
To your statement about Josh, wouldn't at some point Josh be concerned that he's going to have to be going away once James has enough experience?
Actually, yes, and I do bring that in a little bit at certain points. Because, you know, in the beginning, James is really kind of almost relies on Josh as a guide sometimes, because he thinks, okay, what would Josh do? How would Josh handle this? And Josh answers him. They have full-on conversations in his head. So, but as things go along, James kind of starts to threaten Josh a little bit in that, you know, if it wasn't for me, you wouldn't even exist, so, you know, cool it kind of thing. So as things go along, as James starts to, Josh is who James wishes he was. So as he starts to gain more experience and starts to incorporate some of those pieces of Josh back into his own personality, yeah, Josh becomes threatened. That the whole idea of Josh becomes threatened, but he's still there, and he's still an important part of things. That's one of the reasons that Josh evolves and changes too, because he's evolving to fit the situation, the changes in James's personality. But there comes a point where James has to make a choice. You know, does he keep the persona of Josh alive and out there, or does he come out to the world and say, hey, I'm really Josh McDaniel? You know, so there is that point, and it's handled toward the end of the first book a little bit, but it will still come up as James and Josh both evolve. and that's part of the whole evolution of the character is the integrating of those personalities. But they're still, he's been there for so long that I don't think that Josh will ever go away. And at least he hopes not. Yeah.
So we've heard about all three books.
Yep.
And we've heard about an array of characters across all three books.
Yeah.
And now we've heard about an array of personalities in the same characters across these books. How difficult is it to keep track of all of that?
You do have to keep good notes. I actually have a character file on each character. But part of it is that, you know, just like keeping track of friends and family, once you really get to know your characters, which is really an important part of being able to speak as them in the book, in your books and in your stuff, they become separate personalities. You get to know them and get to know about them so much that you almost never have to go back and look at those things after a while because you know them so well. They're the people that you spend most of your time with. Much to the chagrin of my wife. But yes, they're the ones that you spend a lot of time with them, and so you get to know them, and they become very cemented in your head. But yeah, you do have to go back and look at the character file sometimes, and just for continuity reasons, and say, oh wait, where did this guy grow up? What did he do? What, you know, I mean, how long has he known this person? Whatever, you know, I mean, so you do have to do some tracking of that kind of stuff. A lot of writers use software specifically for that. There's a program called AutoCrit. You can keep track of your plot. You can keep track of your characters. You have all of these different elements. You can keep track of all the different elements, scenes, locations, all that kind of thing. I tend to be a little more organic about it. In the writing industry, they say there's two kinds of writers. You have your planners and your pantsers, those who fly by the seat of their pants. I'm a pantser. So, but I am becoming a little more of a planner, especially when you're doing a series, because there's a lot of elements to keep straight. You have a lot of threads that keep going that have to be woven together by the end of a book. And so you do have to become a little bit of a planner, but for the most part, it's just, you know, you get to know your characters so well that it's just like talking about a member of your family or of your friends, the people you hang out with all the time. And so it's, you know, it's really that. But I do keep a file on. You know, they have dossiers. And if I think of something interesting that I think that character might have in their background, I'll put it into that file, and I may or may not use it. If I just come up with something contrary to it, then I delete that piece. You know, just for continuity, so that I know that the characters are complete that way, and that they're not. I don't have things that conflict that way.
Do you have any advice for people that are attempting to write their first book, or that are feeling a little bit overwhelmed becoming a new author?
Yeah, I felt overwhelmed when I first started because I was doing short essays and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Really, nothing over about 2,000 words before I embarked on a 56,000 word book. First thing is, don't think about how long the book's going to be. Get your ideas straight. Get your characters straight. Get to know your characters so that you know the story that you're telling. You know, that you know who you're telling them about. And really just stick with it. Go sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph, and eventually you'll be chapter by chapter. And you know where the book's going, you know where the end is, but don't think about what it's going to take to get there all the time. You can have a rough outline so you know kind of the path you're taking. That helps. But if you get too detailed in your outline, then it starts to look overwhelming. So start out by just writing pieces, little pieces, and then you start putting the pieces together. They're building blocks. And you start putting the blocks together. When you go to build a house, you don't look at the whole, pile of things that you're building it out of and go, oh crap, how am I going to stack all this stuff together? No, you start by making the foundation. And then you'll stack the walls, and you'll do the plumbing, and you'll do the electrical. You take each piece at a time that way. And eventually, when you get done, you have a house. And that's the same way it is with a book. And the big deal is don't force it. Try to do something every day. Try to be, write something every day. And yeah, you may have to go back and rewrite it. You may have to do that, but it's always easier to edit than it is to edit a written page than it is to write a blank page. So write anything, whatever comes into your head, whatever, and then go back and edit and use those pieces that you've done to build the story, and then start filling in the pieces in between, and pretty soon you have a book, and you totally surprise yourself, because I had no idea that I could do it. When I first set out to do it, I really didn't think I could. And now I'm into the third book. And I've got the ideas for the fourth book and for another book, and possibly a series even based on Nestor. So I may have a second series that will come off of that as well. So it doesn't look as daunting as it used to, but it's something that you just have to do every day. And that's really it. That's the biggest deal, is do it every day. Even if it's wrong, because you can always edit. Especially nowadays where you're not banging it out on a typewriter. I mean, you can move things around on a computer, you can do things, you can clip it, you can just say, if you don't like what you wrote, save it off in a junk file, because you may want it later. You may go, oh, didn't I write something like that? And then you go back to your junk file and pull it out, yeah, and now you can edit that and make it fit, and stuff too. So don't throw anything away either. That's the other thing. Just utilize that and do it every day. Anybody else comments? Is that about it?
Probably a good place to
Okay.
turn things over to Alicia. So
All
thank
right.
you, everybody, for the well thought out questions. I wonder how that happened. And what we're going to do now is we're going to turn things over to Alicia for
Awesome.
a couple minutes, and then we'll close things up. So I'm going to
All
have
right.
you sit here and switch spots.
Okay.
And Alicia's going to come on up here.
Alright, this is a little different because I don't know if the camera might need to get any closer to kind of see what I'm doing.
Yeah. You can get things out of the way so you can set it up here.
Sorry. Sorry.
That's
Let's
okay.
see.
Alright.
Let's see if we can get this to come down. Bad Facebook Live video. Okay. Thank you.
Alright. Okay, so I didn't rehearse this at all, so bear with me here. But the main idea of this is just to kind of, for those who maybe have a book already written, or in the middle of their book and they've just got
Tell
this.
people what you're doing first. You're doing a little work. You kind of doing a little workshop on.
Right, and that's kind of where I was going with
good.
it. So, sorry.
We're all new to this.
Sorry.
Right. But yeah, if you've got a book idea written and now you're looking at your cover, you've got an idea of what your cover needs to display, but say you're just not sure where to go with it, right? So you pick out an image and you think it's a fantastic image and you want to go with it. I've seen a lot of authors make the mistake of just grabbing that image, putting their information on it, putting it out there, and by the time they published it, you look on Amazon and there's a dozen other books with that same exact image. And when you're looking at ebooks, you've got this little tiny spot here, and there's 12 others that look just like it. Your book's not going to stand out. So just kind of a quick idea of a couple things you can do search-wise, just to say, that you've looked up this image to see if it's going to be unique. So just kind of an example. You can use different stock places, like Adobe has stock images. There's a lot of websites that have free stock images, but if it's free, typically it's going to have been used by a bunch of other people. So that's where the search really comes in. So I'm just going to use an example of an image that I've used that I didn't search. So I went to Adobe Stock, looked up female warrior, and right here on the first page is one that I used. So it's right there on the first page of that pretty generic search term. So it's probably have been used by several people, but I used it. So what I'm going to do is click on that image, and then I'm going to right click and I'm going to save the image address. That's the URL that that image is on. And then Google has this really neat thing called an image search. So if you go to Google, you can type in image search, and then it's got your images right here. And then you can click on the little camera and paste in that image URL, and it's going to search by the image. And now you're going to come up with all the uses of these different images, which so far looks like the same exact one. And if you read it, you've got a bunch of different names and websites and blogs and stuff that this image has been used on. So as we go through Google pages, that same one is pretty popular. You've got a few different renditions of it here with some bordering, different names and stuff, but it's all the same exact image. So if I use it, it's not really going to stand out. Now, another cool thing that I just found not too long ago is that Amazon on its mobile app has an image search as well. So if you go to your phone and you open up the mobile app.
What's the name of that URL again so I can pop in the comments?
Which one? It's Google image search.
Keep in mind that all the words on Facebook Live are backwards.
Oh, right. True. Okay, so I apologize for the backwardsness of everything. I didn't realize that. Thank you, Michelle, for pointing that out. But in this app, there's going to be a little camera icon here. You can click on that or tap on that, and it's going to bring up an actual camera that you can use. So if I go and I take a picture of this image, it's going to search through all the different books or images on Amazon to show it. So if I can get a little closer here, now you can kind of scroll through and you can see how many different books use that same exact image. Mine is down here at the very bottom. Now I use the same image, but I dropped the background, I colored it up, and I made it a little more, like it pops a little more than the rest of them. But still, had I done that search in the first place, then I probably would have used something different to make it stand out. So, and that's kind of it. That's kind of the basic thing. Those are just two things that you really want to look at to help you go by that very visual image to say, hey, do I really want to use this? Or do I want to maybe spend a couple bucks on a website like Adobe or another place to utilize, you know, an image that stands out to your books alone? I know that Eldred has a story behind the images on his book, if you want to.
Actually, yeah, I'm also a photographer, so I shoot my own images.
Right.
And one of the ways that one of the elements that I do is I have a key element, which is that karma card, Bank of Karma card, that I keep in all of my images. So that makes them unique in that there's no other books that are going to have that. So even if somebody shoots something similar, I have that key element in all of my covers that's going to identify it as my book and make it stand out.
Right. So if you have a good camera.
Well, but also you can take those images and you can do, if you have a key element, something that is common, especially if you're doing a series, if you have something that ties to your series, that's a common element that you can Photoshop into it and make it different to bring that out, that's something that you can do as well.
Which is kind of what I did with this one, and we'll just see if I can bring it up bigger. I just made it a little more colorful. Oh, there we go. Just made it a little more colorful, superimposed the palace into the background, just to kind of, and which is my key element through all three of this trilogy.
Right.
Like he said, you know, just to make sure that
Yeah, that sets you apart.
it sets you apart, and it kind of gives you a brand.
Right.
To your books.
It's part of your branding, yeah.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Right, and that's pretty much all I had for that. So
Very
thank you
interesting.
very much.
Well, I'm going to grab this way. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in on Facebook Live, and I did put a link to your Facebook on the
Oh,
comments.
fantastic.
So
Thank you.
Everybody can buy there. And Alicia will be doing one more workshop. When's your workshop going to be?
I believe it's September 9th around the same time. Yep.
Right. And so we have a couple kind of learning things that'll happen at, when we're doing author series. And so I'm going to turn the camera around for everybody to say goodbye to everybody. So this is all the support crew. So everybody say bye, everybody. Have a good day. Thank you.
Thanks.